How are we doing? Is everybody ready and in place? I think we're ready. All right, I think we're ready to get started. Welcome and good afternoon. We are really thrilled you're here for this afternoon's press conference. Today, and a few moments ago, we concluded the trial regarding SB 1. We concluded closing arguments today in the U.S. District Court for Western Texas, and today marks a pivotal moment in the case. And so you'll hear from the lead attorneys in the case, and you'll also hear from two plaintiffs in the case as well. Delta Sigma Theta, represented by Elsie Cook Holmes, the international president, and Mika Simmons, who serves as a general counsel and chief compliance officer. You'll also hear from Ray Shackelford, who represents the Houston Area Urban League. So we'll start with questions for the attorneys. You'll hear statements from the two plaintiffs, and they're also open to questions. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jennifer Holmes. I'm Deputy Director of Litigation from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And I have to say it was a very long day in court today. We started at 9 and now it's almost 5:30. But although I'm very tired, I felt so energized every time I looked out onto the gallery and saw just the sea of ladies in red supporting our case and supporting the right to vote. So I'm so happy to represent them along with my co-counsel in this case. And happy to take any questions.
Can you summarize some of the key points made during today's proceedings?
Sure. I think, these proceedings come after a 6-week-long trial. So this was our opportunity to kind of pull together all the evidence, all the testimony and the briefs and everything we've submitted throughout this case and kind of make our last stand in terms of our arguments. And I think what became clear is how, on our side, the people who are fighting for the right to vote, our arguments are very strongly tied to the impact on people, the impact on voters, on communities, on organizations that serve those communities, and why this law harms them. And on the other side, the argument was really kind of technical, very sterile, just kind of hiding behind a lot of technicalities in the case law to try to prevent people from voting and make it harder for people to vote. So we really tried to bring to bear the true burdens that are caused by SB 1, the things that make it more difficult for the Black community to assist others when they need it, to vote by mail, to use drive-through voting or 24-hour voting, and voting innovations that were implemented in certain areas to expand access to the franchise. So that's what we tried to lift up in our arguments, because we didn't want it to get too bogged down in kind of more technical, dry arguments.
How do you believe this case will impact similar legal battles in the future?
Well, it's definitely, it can't be denied that this is not just a fight in Texas. This is a fight across the United States for voting rights. There is a wave of laws that have been passed and are still being passed that are trying to suppress the right to vote. And so this is just one battle in the fight against all of those laws. So it's important to take kind of that broader view, because what's happening here is not isolated to Texas. We've seen it in Georgia, in Florida, in Alabama, and we are also fighting in many of the legal battles in many of those states. So we hope we can get a favorable ruling and it'll have a positive impact in those other cases.
Last question. Considering what you said with the widespread presence of voter suppression laws, what can the public do, considering that it's going to be an issue that's large enough to attack all of the multiple states?
Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing, and it's certainly the Deltas have been an example of this, is you have to be engaged in the process early on. I'm a lawyer. I can only come in after the law's been passed and after things start to go wrong, but the community needs to be engaged on the front end when this is in the legislature and being debated, and lending your voice by giving testimony, by making clear the fight against these laws before they actually take root and become laws. So, learning about these issues when they're still kind of percolating in the legislature is crucially important, and fighting against the bad bills before they become law. And I think at a minimum, you have to vote, because that affects who's going to be passing these laws. You got to vote, and you got to register other people to vote and help them get out to the polls, because that's going to change the face of the legislature that is putting these laws in place.
Do you have a question?
Okay, great.
All right. Yeah, so we'll hear from the plaintiffs. So we'll start with Elsie Cook Holmes from Delta Sigma Theta.
Good afternoon. I am Elsie Cook Holmes, the International President of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and I am certainly honored to stand before you today, united with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in championing Texas Senate Bill 1. This lawsuit is definitely more than a legal battle. It is a fight for our democracy. It's interesting, Jennifer, you made the comment about being up front before things became law. And I will tell you that members of Delta Sigma Theta from the state of Texas were there during the deliberations of this law. They were there all day and into the night until the middle of the night before their testimonies were even heard while this bill was being debated. So Delta Sigma Theta was there from the very beginning. This became law anyway, despite the testimonies of our members. This law represents a direct threat to the foundational values of our nation and the rights of voters of color, deliberately targeting Black and Latino communities especially, as well as voters with disabilities. It's not just an act of voter suppression, it is a calculated attempt to dishonor voices that have fought tirelessly for decades for their rightful place in the electoral process. Delta Sigma Theta was founded on the premise of social justice and advocacy, beginning with our participation in 1913 in the Women's Suffrage March. And we've been at the forefront for the fight of voting rights since that time. We recognize that political empowerment is absolutely crucial for social change. Our involvement didn't end with the passage of the 19th Amendment. It was only the beginning for us. And we have continued to break down barriers for voting rights, standing against all forms of discrimination that disenfranchise marginalized communities. And our commitment extends beyond the courtroom, as I mentioned earlier, but from the civil rights movement to today's battles against modern forms of voter suppression, Delta Sigma Theta has led voter registration drives, education campaigns, mobilization efforts, all of these things to ensure every citizen can exercise their right to cast their ballot and have it counted. We recognize the interconnectedness of voting rights with broader social justice issues, including education, economic opportunity, health care equity, and criminal justice reform. So voting rights is tied to all of that. And so it's absolutely critical that we protect the right to vote.
Thanks, Madam President. I think one other point we want to make, thank you so much, is about the absence of federal legislation. And so we would like to invite Mika Simmons to speak to that.
Good afternoon. I am Mika Simmons, General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer for Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and a co-plaintiff in this litigation. After nearly 3 years, our determined fight against SB 1 has reached a significant milestone. In the past 4 months, we've listened to firsthand accounts from those impacted by SB 1, including 2 of our members, Michelle Brown and Sharon Watkins Jones, who steadfastly affirmed SB 1's threat. In 2021, Texas, joining Georgia, Florida, and over 16 other states passed laws suppressing voter rights, responding directly to the increased electoral participation and demands for change by voters of color. Delta's challenge to Texas SB 1 and Georgia's SB 202 reflects our unwavering commitment to safeguarding voting rights. Despite employing state-level strategies to bolster these rights, the absence of federal protection has us constantly addressing issues as they emerge, much like a game of whack-a-mole. There is a systematic and coordinated effort to erode our voting rights. necessitating a multi-pronged approach to protect and advance the rights of Black, brown, and all people. While Delta is currently in litigation in Georgia and Texas and in conversations with the Legal Defense Fund to challenge restrictive laws in other states, strategically, the sorority is also speaking with the NAACP, LDF, and our partners, our community partners, to enact legislation in various states that affirmatively protects voters' rights and permanently codifies everyone's right to equal access and unobstructed voting. This reality also strengthens our advocacy for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act, emphasizing the need to codify voting rights federally once and for all. We should not have to fight these challenges. We as a people certainly should not have to fight these challenges state by state, which requires unimaginable amount of resources, time, and people. We need federal legislation that permanently and proactively protects our voting rights and the rights of all people. Thank you.
The final voice we'll hear from is from the Houston Area Urban League, Ray Shackelford.
Good evening. My name is Ray Shackelford. I'm representing the Houston Area Urban League. And so from a national perspective, for those not familiar, the Urban League has been in existence for 114 years this September. The second oldest civil rights organization, as far as Houston is concerned, been in existence since June 1968. And our mission is simple. It's to empower Black people and other marginalized groups when it comes to economic self-reliance, parity, power, and civil rights. So when you look at voting, that's the foundation for that. It's connected to all the work that we do as a direct service organization in addition to the advocacy work. So when you look at education and youth development, what are the things that we're doing to better our students and make sure they have the resources they need so they can go on to be successful people? That's tied to voting. When you look at workforce and training development, what are the jobs that are available to the people in our community? How are we getting them the skills they need, not just for the jobs today, but for the jobs tomorrow? That's tied to voting. When you think about economic development and entrepreneurship, our business owners, how do we make sure they get equitable access to contracts, whether that's women or minorities? That's tied to voting. Any and everything that you can think of is tied to voting and the work that we do with the Houston Area Urban League. And so for us, we were part of this lawsuit, not just because it's so ingrained in our history, but because it's tied directly to the work that we're doing today to make a better tomorrow for all Houstonians as well as all Texans. And so when you look at that, I think this is a landmark case that has very far-reaching impact. I think that today our legal team, Jennifer, I started out working with Victor and then Amir. They are amazing. So literally they are extended family. I don't know if they want to keep us, but they can't get rid of us. We are definitely locked in, and again, we are forever grateful for all the work that they did to prepare us to make sure that we were ready to tell our story, not just for ourselves, but for the people at home. And a lot of times people will say the voiceless, but the thing is, to quote one of my brothers who's an activist in Austin, Chaz, they're not voiceless. They have a voice. Just people aren't listening. And so we're able to take off work. We're blessed in that perspective, or to do this for a living, to where we can be here and speak up for those individuals. And so I'm grateful for that opportunity, and we're looking forward to a successful decision in our favor and for the people that we serve.
Any final questions before we conclude? All right, thanks everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Did that feel better?
Thanks so much for being here.
Danny, it's Hector. Okay, we're done here. It's still up. Okay.
couldn't have done it without you.
Yeah.